Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every Sunday, 10 a.m, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on the website, leave us a Google review, and if you're watching via social media, get involved in the conversation in the comments section below. And the email address, should you want to get in touch, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. There's also a podcast version available every Monday at 10 a.m. Just search Property Matters TV for that. And finally, of course, the show is broadcast across the week on Dilsay Radio. So let's say hi to our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Yep. Yes, good morning, Paul. Good morning to all our viewers and listeners. Happy Sunday. And lots happening in the property market. And of course, with the election booming, sort of beaming around the corner, there's going to be lots more, I'm sure.
Matter of days before we go to the polls, of course, in the UK. The recent pickup in sales market momentum has continued over June. This, of course, is something that we look at every month. The UK House Price Index from Zoopla just gives us an idea of what's happening in the marketplace. New sales agreed are still running 8% higher than a year ago, and other key measures of market activity are also higher year on year. There are signs that market activity is starting to slow as we approach the quieter summer period. Buyers and sellers who were at the start of their home buying process when the election was called are more likely to have delayed their buying decisions until after the election, and that's adding to the slowdown in activity. Sales agreed are down slightly month on month across all regions. The overall stock of homes for sale continues to grow across all areas, albeit at a slower rate than recorded over recent months. There's still almost a fifth more homes for sale than a year ago, and the forecast for the UK house price inflation over 2024 is 1.5%. So it looks, Joe, as if our houses might just go up a tiny bit this year, at last.
Well, in all honesty, the houses haven't done very badly at all. Even throughout the pandemic, they did very well. It's had a little bit of a slow time over the last year, but yes, I think once this election fever settles down, we will start to see a small surge perhaps next year, towards the end of this year, in terms of house prices and interest in the property market. The interest actually hasn't waned at all to a large extent. It's fundamentally just been people sitting on their hands deciding which way and what's going to happen and what is going to influence their decision, be it stamp duty, interest rates, and who it's going to be in power.
I noticed in the detail later on in this, it says that there have been very few forced sales or stressed sales. So the people that are moving are happy to wait for the right buyer. There's very few people are selling because they need to sell. And that's partly because employment is still remaining very high. And also the buyers out there have got more. Wage growth has been quite strong, as we're still seeing. One of the reason that the interest rate is still remaining high is because we've got the service sector very, very inflationary at the moment. So the suggestion is that actually people are holding out for the right price, and generally speaking, those that are buying can afford to.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people are holding out for it. It is a buyer's market. Obviously, the interest rates going up to 5.25 over the last year, 14 times, has obviously slowed that down to some extent. But there are some good offers, good deals being offered in the marketplace for fixed rates for people to come to, especially for the first-time buyers. And just generally, I think there's no apathy. It's just a case of, do you do that thing now, or do you wait a little bit longer? And so there's more stock available. There's no real urgency in the sales. There's no desperate sales going on at this precise moment. The only ones that are involved in that is where they've borrowed maybe a lot more than they anticipated, and the interest rates have been too high to be able to manage or maintain those. So there's always sections, the little sector development sectors. Buy to let obviously had a challenging time because the interest rates went flying through the roof by comparison to what they had them. So it's those areas, those pockets that are actually maybe suffering a little bit. But generally, first-time buyers, home buyers, is pretty static and steady.
Yeah, buyer demand, this is the 4 weeks to the 19th of May. And this is the percentage change year on year. It says the general election campaign fails to dent housing market activity levels. Buyer demand is up 6%, number of sales is up 8%, flow of new supply is up 4%, and stock of homes for sale is 19% higher than a year ago. So currently the house price inflation is zero, it's static, and it's still negative in the south, but it really looks like it's going to be a year of two halves, Joe, because obviously there are a lot of factors for the second half of this year. We'll know who the government is by then, and also, of course, we're looking at interest rates coming down, and many predicting that somewhere around about 4.5%.
Yes, I mean, I personally don't think the interest rates are going to come down to such levels. I think that the best you're going to get is probably about 5% on the base rate. However, I think that lenders will offer fixed rates at something like 4.5%, maybe 4%, 4.25% over 2 to 3 years, for the first time buyers or people that are remortgaging, refinancing, and so forth. So there will be offers in that sort of range. But I think I can't imagine, I've always felt that 5% is probably where the benchmark is going to be, where they won't come back down to the 0.25% and the 1% and the 0.0% again, because they have to balance the situation between the borrowers and of course the savers. And so savers are now able to save and get a return on their investment. And for borrowers at 5.25%, 4.5%, that sort of level, it seems that it's affordable for the new people that are coming through, though they are challenged by the amount that they can borrow, and of course the due diligence that is happening on the amount that they can borrow through from lenders. Their stress tests are quite high. So, it's all of those things that are taken into consideration.
Well, it's also, not only is it a year of two halves, it's a country of two halves, because we've got negative growth, of course, in the south. The eastern region is down 1.4% in price terms, southeast down 1%, southwest down 0.9%, East Midlands 0.4%, London 0.4%. But then when you get sort of north of Birmingham, the West Midlands, Yorkshire, Humberside, Wales, Scotland, the northeast, the northwest, and even Northern Ireland, prices are moving northwards, if you pardon the pun. And the Northern Ireland market is up 3.3% at the moment. So it does seem to be that all the action's in the north, Joe. I guess that's probably due to the fact that you can get so much more for your money, I would suggest.
I think it's a combination of things. You're absolutely right. There is better value for what you're going to get. So you do get a lot more property for your money. But I think the other areas that have affected that is perhaps the end of terms of interest-only mortgages that have come, where people have thought, well, actually in the south, if I can sell clear of that mortgage, then towards the north, I can find a bit more, and their circumstances might change. Employment circumstances have changed a lot as well. People are able to work from home or do works that means logistic travels. People like Amazon, they hire drivers all over the country, pay the similar sort of money. So people think, okay, well, actually afford to go to another part of the country. So all of those things, I think, make quite a substantial amount of difference in the way people think and what they want to look to buy.
Interesting stat here, 75% of this year's sales are completed or already in progress. The 4 to 5 months between a sale being agreed and then completed means we have a good view into the sales pipeline for 2024. And the data, Zoopla says, is that the market is still on track for 1.1 million sales this year. So 75% of all this year's sales are already done, and we're looking at a more active market towards the second half of the year with reducing interest rates. So it surprises me that at this stage, literally in the middle of the year, that 75% of the year is done.
Well, I mean, what you have to bear in mind, Paul, is that in sales, in property sales, estate agency world, you only get about 5 months worth of work out of the 12 months. So the earlier part of this year is probably why the 75% are done or in the system. And the reason why is now for the next 2.5 months, July and August, August, and sort of partly into September, you're going to find that it's a dead market, primarily for two reasons. One, it's summer holidays, kids are off school, the focus and the priorities are very different. People are away, and of course we've had the election fever, which will follow into that. So that's why 75% of the sales have really been done. The balance of the year you've got is a bit of some of September, October, and November. So, but not all of those sales are going to go through. They'll probably build the pipeline. Sales may be arranged, but actually will actually come to completion in 25. So those are the way they calculate. But if you look at the number of bank holidays, the number of holidays, school terms, and all of those combined together, we actually end up with about 5 months worth of marketing and business, and the rest of it is on holidays, really.
It's interesting to put that 1.1 million into perspective. They say there's still 250,000 sales to be agreed, and they expect them to be done by the end of the year. But 1.1 million sales is in fact 10% higher than last year, but it's still below the 20-year average. The 20-year average is 1.2 million. And for those watching, you can see it on the screen here now. So we've got everything from 2004, this is the number of sales done, everything from 2004 to 2024. And the average is over 20 years is 1.2 million. And we can see 2024 going below that, but you can see 2004, 5, 6, and 7. We had 1.6, maybe 1.4, and then 1.7, and then 1.6 again, roughly million. And then 2008, the crash, down to less than a million for the next 5 years, which tells a story, doesn't it, Joe?
Absolutely, and it's, as I said, if you look back, and we've said this before in our program, that over the 50 years, probably 5 times so far, that it's actually had a reverse gear. Majority of the time, it's been steady, neutral, and drive. And so I think that's where we are with the market at the moment. We are in probably neutrally parked, and I think it would be back into drive. But yes, the market has shown previously how far it can go backwards. But hopefully that's not something that we need to look forward to.
They say that the market's been very resilient this year given the height of the mortgage rate. Higher borrowing costs have reduced the buying power of new buyers rather than sizable price falls. The main impact has been a sharp decline in the number of sales, which were 23% lower over 2023. House prices haven't fallen as there's been very few forced sellers, as we were saying a moment ago. Unemployment has stayed low by historic standards, and there are a relatively small number of people struggling to pay their mortgage and falling into arrears despite wider cost of living pressures. House prices still look expensive on various measures of affordability. Zoopla expects house price inflation to remain muted, likely to rise more slowly than household incomes over the next 1 to 2 years. Housing remains overvalued, but the trend is improving. One way we track affordability, they say, is to measure the extent to which actual house prices are higher or lower than the affordable house price calculated from household incomes and mortgage rates. The recent jump in mortgage rates led to house prices becoming overvalued by 13% by the end of last year. This is less severe than in the run-up to 2007, which was the global financial crisis, and the late 1980s house price bubble. Double-digit price falls followed both of these periods of overvaluation. Price falls have been smaller more recently as the overvaluation was more modest and sales volumes have taken the hit. And you can see on the screen now where we are at the end of last year, 13%, so quite high in terms of overvaluation, but they see that correcting and indeed going down below the mean average of zero just towards the end of this year. So things been up and down, but going to be all right by the end of the year, I guess.
Yeah, like I said, it's been pretty steady, really. I mean, there are pockets of areas and pockets of circumstances that cause that sort of graph to go up and down, but fundamentally, it's been a steady year, considering all the things that's been going on. And certainly in the next week or so, we will start to see some other direction as to who is going to be in number 10 and how that's going to pan out for the housing market.
I do see some evidence of mortgage buyers having also taken longer term mortgages to eke out an extra, say, 5% on the additional buying power. Because obviously one of the things, as we've talked about before, with a higher interest rate, it means that what you can afford obviously drops down considerably. So that 3-bedroom home might actually still have to be a 2-bed, or a 4 becomes a 3. But what they're doing is, and I guess there's no surprise in this, getting a longer period as possible to make sure they get what they want.
Yes, the mortgages are being extended. I mean, usually, traditionally, it was 20 possibly 25 years. 25 years is pretty standard, but I'm hearing that 30 and up to 35 years is now also being considered by first-time buyers or new borrowers, so that basically they have that extra time to see that the market flows back in the right way, and of course they don't end up with a poor investment, not only in a home but also in the asset, because most people buy a home as part of their asset base as well. It's not just about a home. It's about also, am I investing in the right property, right type of property, right location, right area? All of the things are relatively important.
Looking ahead, they say interest rates hold the key. Based on City forecasts, they say that they expect mortgage rates to remain in the 4 to 4.5% range going into next year. This is sufficient to support sales volumes and low single-digit levels of house price inflation. House prices in the south are expected to continue to underperform the UK average, as they realign with incomes. Real income growth is the key to supporting sales and demand into 2025. So I guess that's no surprise there, and it really does depend on what the new government can do with interest rates.
Yes, like I said, I think they'll hold on the interest rates for a while. Even though the inflation rates come down to 2%, there are still other factors that they are considering, and it may be that it will be in the next meeting that they'll bring it down. But I can't imagine that they're going to bring it down for less than 5%. I think it might be, if they do, they might shave off a quarter. And if it's 5% as a base rate, then lenders are considering fixed rates, anything between 4 and 4.5% as a fixed rate. Maybe in some cases for long term there might be a bit less, but we'll have to wait and see what happens there over the next few weeks.
Other commentators are saying they expect house prices to rise this year by around, that's across the board, not just the south, but overall to rise by about 3%. And they make the point that actually that's roughly where inflation is now. So broadly speaking, house prices are keeping level with inflation, which from an economics point of view is probably a good thing.
Yes, I mean, again, that's one of the reasons why I think the Bank of England has held not making the cut in the interest rate, is because though the headline inflation is down to 2%, I think there are some other factors in the background that may actually keep it a little bit higher. So they want to really see that in real time and real term at the around the 2% across the board. And that's when they'll probably consider making the changes. But the good thing is that, home buying a property is still one of the best form of investment, not just for investment for the sake of income or value, but also for the ownership and the fact that people will always want to own or buy their property at some stage of their lives. So I think the housing market has been fairly resilient, even though we have not had particularly good support in the last year or so, either with support with the buildings. There's still a shortage of house building. The planning process is pretty dire. There's a whole bunch of things that could cause a lot of problems, but the resilience comes from those people that are still interested in the housing market, which I would say is probably over 90% of the population.
Well, Bob Singh is watching us on LinkedIn at the moment. Thank you, Bob, for watching. He says US inflation is down, so maybe 2 cuts, he reckons, this year. So if we assume 0.25% there, from what Bob is saying, then the first one would take us down to 5, wouldn't it? Then so 4.75. Can we split the difference, Joe? An agreement, the two of us?
I'm not going to challenge Bob. Bob is, a very learned mortgage broker and has his finger on the pulse. I don't tend to sort of commit myself in the mortgage market because that's where Bob's expertise comes. But I'm happy to split the difference and stick to 4.9 or something like that. But I still feel that 5% is going to be the marker, and I'm happy to be proved wrong in that case, Bob. Thank you for your input as always.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's plenty on the new government's plate when they get into power, isn't they? I mean, you've got first-time buyers, and they're looking at things like energy efficiency. They're wanting to cut down their bills, so they're looking for measures on the green element of it, and they're looking at what products are going to be available for them to make it easier to buy. So there's going to be plenty on the new Prime Minister's in tray in terms of property, isn't there?
Well, yes, I think we've got to wait and see. It might be a bit of a hung parliament. It might be some sort of coalition. We have no idea where it's going to fall, but it's not long now, is it? Thursday the 4th is the day that we'll solve that, or at least by the end of that evening, it will probably start to solve it as to where it is. And yeah, let's fingers crossed that it comes in the right direction. That's all.
Well, let's have a look at a story that I found this week, which I found on the BBC website in all interest. And this is about the power of the renters in this new election. I thought this was quite interesting. Margaret Thatcher had Essex Man, New Labour had Mondeo Man, David Cameron had Mumsnet Mums, and Boris had Workington Man. They all symbolise voters who switched their votes in the election, effectively deciding who will lose and win. So what about 2024? When working out the key electoral blocks, says the BBC, it is possible that renter Ruth could be the
Okay.
key if Labour are to win. As the polls currently suggest, in the last decade, the number of renters has increased while the Conservative Party has seen its share of support among that group fall. In 2022-3, the private rented sector in England accounted for 4.6 million, or 19% of households, about doubling the size of what it was in the early 2000s. This is according to the English Housing Survey. This is larger than those renting social housing. The issue affecting renters, or the issues affecting renters, have never been more never visible politically, get my teeth in, be it safety after the Grenfell Tower, or, of course, attempts to ban no-fault evictions after the COVID pandemic. The housing affordability crisis also created more renters than ever, particularly in the private sector. The Tory party manifesto commits to eventually banning no-fault evictions. The party first proposed this policy in 2019, but the bill did not become law until the end of the last parliament. Labour says it will abolish no-fault evictions and empower renters to challenge what is described as unreasonable rent increases. Keir Starmer has said Labour would pass new laws to prevent rental bidding wars if his party is elected. The Liberal Dems also pledged to ban no-fault evictions, and they say they would make a 3-year tenancy the default. The Greens also back the ending of no-fault evictions and say they want the introduction of long-term leases. Reform do not back the Renters Reform Bill, introducing their previous parliament. They say they will boost the monitoring, appeals and enforcement process for renters with grievances, with every party vying for renters' support and with often overlapping policy options. How might the influential bloc make the difference in the 4th of July? It's interesting, isn't it, that there is so many people renting and they're at the lower end of the age spectrum, so they're traditionally more likely to vote red.
Yes, I think again, it's just really more of a change that I think people are looking for. I'm not particularly sure that red and blue are actually coming up with any of the right solutions. I personally think that the renters reform bill, and I've always said that, made my point quite clear. I don't believe that it needs to be as drastic as they're trying to make it. The result of that renters reform has ended up in the buy-to-let market absolutely almost disappearing off the face of the earth. Private rental market, a lot of people came out of it because all the laws, the taxations, all the reasons for it were just not working for in their interest to make sure that it was a viable package. So whilst I think you can have Renter Ruth and Blog Joe or whatever you want to call it now going forward as a group that might make a decision. I accept that the renter market is strong. There is more people renting, and it is important to see that. But it's a, as you would say, it's a story of two halves. No landlords, no renting, and no renters, no landlords. So we are stuck with that situation, and the way it's designed at the moment, a lot of people in the buy-to-let market are walking away from it because it's just too complex. So they might bring in a bill, but there might not be anybody there to actually have that bill to activate, and it will go back to those corporates that are now vying for that market share, buying and building blocks and then taking them on and doing long-term rentals through that. So yeah, it's another one to watch in the space, but I'm not particularly excited by it because I think that a lot of people that would have stayed in the buy-to-let market have left and probably are still leaving in hordes.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stats about that for sure. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that we've sat on this programme right the way through this last government, because it was still a Tory government when we started. So we've always said that nobody seems to take housing very seriously. We've had all those housing ministers, and they've just done absolutely nothing, really, generally speaking, over the period. But of course, this suggests here that this could actually be this group of people could be one of the groups that actually influences the outcome. They're saying there's a good number of constituencies with high numbers of private renters. So in London, that's Kensington and Bayswater, Finchley and Golders Green, and Chipping Barnet, which has 20% of people who are private renters, and they're all held at the moment by the Conservative Party, but deemed to be vulnerable. There are similar situations outside London, with Conservative-held seats in Colchester, Eastbourne, Cheltenham, and in the Red Wall at Burnley, all constituencies where more than 20% of people are private renters, now targeted by Labour or the Liberal Democrats. And interestingly, in 2010, the general election, private renters were as likely to vote Conservative as they were Labour. Both parties got about 26% of the vote. By 2015, this had shifted, with Labour gaining a 15 percentage point advantage over the Conservatives. Under the previous Conservative-led coalition government, there had been reforms to housing benefit that made housing trickier to come by for some reliant on benefits to help them rent privately. Since then, this division has only solidified, compounded by the age divide over Brexit and immigration. And in recent years, voting patterns have increasingly diverged by age, with younger people leaning increasingly towards Labour in particular. Most private renters are, of course, relatively young. So all of that doesn't suggest well. And it says the youngest voters are more likely to say that housing is one of the top issues facing the country. It's regarded as a top issue in the top three for those aged 18 to 34, according to an Ipsos issue tracker. But it's not as important, not surprisingly, for older groups of people. So it does suggest that the renters might get their say in this election after years of being neglected.
Yes, I'm pretty certain they're going to have a major influence on how the policy shapes up, as they're a big market, and a lot of young people are renting, and they want to either own or be in a position to get a loan to secure a property, or so forth. So I get the fact that they're going to make an influence, but I'm just saying that I'm not certain that the renters reform bill is in its current state is correct, and that's part of the reason it's never got through, is because so many people are actually making, comments on that and making it hard for that to go through. But let's see what Renter Ruth turns up.
They say not only are young people much less likely to turn out to vote than their older counterparts, but renters are also less likely to vote than homeowners. This is interesting because it's always been compounded. It's been compounded by reforms in 2014 to electoral registration, which the Electoral Commission research shows disproportionately affected renters who move much more often. It found that 35% of private renters were missing from the registers in 2022, compared to only 5% of homeowners. So what the respective parties say on housing will no doubt influence who some private renters vote for, but getting them voting in the first place might be very, very important. It's interesting, if 35% of private renters aren't even registered to vote, and I suppose if you're buying a home, then you're probably, part of that sort of due diligence and ID and V, as they call it, identification and verification. You probably have to commit to, the fact that you're on the electoral register.
Well, I think the commitment on the electoral register is there. The apathy in actually putting an X in the box or getting to a polling station is huge. And actually, that's the real reason why there's so much disparity on what we end up with, because one of the God-given rights of the UK and any independent country, a democratic country, is that the people that live there have the right to vote. And it's quite interesting. And I've been listening to a lot of people this last few weeks who just, because they're not sure which way they want to go, what they tend to do is say, I won't do anything. And actually, that's the worst thing, is not to do anything. And so when the wrong things happen, which inevitably they will, they then sit there and go, I wish I'd done this. So hindsight's a great thing. So, you have the right to vote, and you need to cast that vote to make sure whoever's elected does the right thing for you as the people. Otherwise, by not doing that in effect, you're just giving someone else a carte blanche check to go and change the things that maybe actually do long term affect you. So I think the apathy there is for people, both young, old, or indifferent, renting or selling or home ownership. It's very, very important that they should actually go out and do that. But I know that, looking at the figures, I mean, if you look at all the polls that are ever taken, Paul, they don't take a poll of the entire country. They take a poll of average. Let's say they asked 1,000 people, and out of that 1,000, they make the decision whether someone is going to be, thinking about red, or someone's going to think about blue, or whatever the circumstances might be. So it's those 1,000 people that influence the rest of the country. And so when they influence the rest of the country, then when it's the wrong people, then it's your own fault for not actually going out and dealing with it yourself. So you're going to get whatever you're going to give if you don't go out there and do what you've got the God-given right to do, is to go and vote.
Absolutely. And this time next week, we know, because we will know, because the new government will be 3 days old, which is quite a weird thing to think about. So we'll see what happens in this next week. And don't forget to tune in again for another fascinating episode of Property Matters this time next week.